All right, hello fellow coders. In this lesson, we're going to build on our app that we've been trying to put together, which is a React front end with a Spring Boot backend with a RESTful web service. In this one, we're going to be diving into more details on the React language, some of the interesting things that you can do with React, such as the useEffect hook and what the implications are of that. And then, yeah, hopefully we'll be able to build out more of our RESTful web service and have more functionality come into fruition, because now we can have access to and leverage our JSON web token. So if that all sounds good to you, stick around. All right, welcome back. Let's get to work. So before I dive into all that juicy stuff I talked about, I do want to do one little minor thing to our the layout of our project. So this is the assignment submission app. That's the app that we are working on right now. This is the folder and where everything exists. The source folder here is where the exists, the back end of the application. This is where the Java code is. I want to modify this slightly. So here's the front end, which is where our React code lies. If you go into the front end folder, there is then a web folder, and I don't love that. I intended everything to go into just the front end folder. So to fix this, I kind of want to take the web folder, go back to the root folder where both apps exists, the front end and the back end of the app exist, paste the web folder. So it's going to move all the files. Oh, it can't move it because it's in use. Let me just close my and try again. There we go. So the web folder was moved. Now the front end folder is going to be empty. I'm going to delete the front end folder. And then for web, I kind of want it to be called front end, so I'm going to rename it to front end. So there we go. I just sort of rejigged things around, and now we have a front end folder inside of our assignment submission app that actually has our React application inside of it. Now that's going to throw the rest of our stuff into chaos. As you can see, it's freaking out over here saying, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. Well, actually that's more because we turned off the VS Code server. So let's open VS Code back up. And I will, can I dock this on the left? There we go. And then I will have the stuff here on the right. Move this here, move this over here. All right. So now, as you can see, when I opened up my VS Code, the project that we were working on is gone. Well, that's because I changed the folder, right? So I changed the structure. So if I go to open recent, it's going to try to look for it. Well, it's not even there anymore. So I need to now go to open folder and point it to where that folder was. So I need to go back to Git, assignment submission app, front end is where everything exists, and then select this folder. Now we will be back in business with our stuff. I also want to do one more thing. I have GitHub Desktop here with all of our changes. I want to commit all of these changes. So I'm going to say adding React.js front end to the project and commit that and push. So now I have the code is at least saved in the web. In our public repository. So now we're back in business. Let me go back to my terminal and fire up my server again, npm start, and then I'll get the web back up and the app back up and running, and the front end app anyway. So let's dive into what I promised you at the beginning, at the top of this video, which is back in the app.js file. This is where our code was that we left off with. I want to modify this slightly, because if you do the F12 again over here to open the dev tools, you see that it's executing stuff twice. So why? Like I said, when React notices something has changed, it will refresh, it'll like re-render the app. And when it re-renders, it goes and reruns this code again, right? The code, I should say, it normally is from here to here. Now it's not rerunning the console log hello, so clearly something is a little bit off, but we'll just see if the useEffect hook conversation fixes this. So what is useEffect? What is the useEffect hook? Well, as of React, I don't know, version 16 or something, they introduced the concept of hooks that allow us to tie into the sort of the rendering engine that React is built upon, to tailor when code should run or should not run. So we can like a surgeon with a scalpel, we can say, hey, only run this code when this happens, or only run this code when that happens. So right now we don't have any control over that, but the useEffect hook allows us to tie into that. So when I say useEffect, I can click on this guy here and it should import it. Boom. So you see it doesn't import up here. From React, it brings in the useEffect dependency. So now useEffect is just a method. That's all it is. Don't get too, wigged out about what is this thing. It's just a method. It's a function. We're calling a function, right? This function that we can call has 2 arguments. The first argument is an object, essentially. And the second object is a dependency list as an array. Okay, that's it. That's the majesty of the useEffect hook. It's upset. Why is it upset with me? Accepts a function. Why is it? What's the warning? Anyway, inside of the useEffect hook here, we can pass in what it is that we want to have happen. So basically, we could move our fetch. Well, all of this code, the fetch, we can move it up into the useEffect hook and save. Now. I have some syntax errors. Give me 1 second to fix these. Right, sorry, my bad. I just did a quick Google. I was like, I haven't used React in a little while, so I have these little tiny gaps in my knowledge that need filling. It's not an object. So the first parameter that you pass into the useEffect hook is not an object, it's a function. So what I was missing was the function notation here, the sort of the lambda notation for passing in a function. So as you can see, hopefully, if all goes well, let me rerun this code. As you can see now, hello shows up once, and then our code here only shows up once as being run once. Okay, so that happened because of this useEffect hook. It is now, when we pass in the empty dependency list like this, and I'll talk about what dependencies are in just a minute, when you pass in this empty array, what that means is essentially this is saying run this code once on load. So when the page loads, run this code once. That is what an empty dependency array that you pass in as a parameter to this useEffect function. Remember the function, useEffect function that we're executing takes 2 parameters. The first parameter is another function. The second parameter is an array. Okay, but when you pass in an empty array, that means there are no dependencies here. So when there are no dependencies, and I'll explain what that means in a moment, when there are no dependencies, it just runs the code once. So that begs the question, what the heck is a dependency? Well, dependencies are for blocks of code here. So for our function that we're passing in, if there is anything that can change in here, if there's anything that changes in our code, if it changes, we might want that change to be reflected in the UI, right? So imagine we have like a counter going, there's a countdown happening, and every time the countdown changes, the countdown, goes down from 100 to 99 to 98 to 97, every time that value changes, we want to fire off an update to the UI and reflect that a change has happened. We want to see that counter counting down 1 by 1 by 1. So that means that this, if you put it in a useEffect hook, a useEffect function, that counter going down and down, down, changing, that value changing, is a dependency on that particular useEffect hook. So what that means is we inject it as a dependency. So if we had a counter in here as a variable, we could put counter in here and then, have it do something, right? To have it do something with that counter in this block of code. Now, I don't want to get into that right now, but that's how dependencies work. However, if there is no dependency, what happens is it says, oh, there's no dependency, so therefore I'm just going to run this once and then be done with it, right? So if anything else changes on the screen, don't keep on rerunning the code, is basically what we're telling it to do, which is great. So we're going to see a lot more about useEffect hooks, so don't worry, that's definitely on the books. Now, what we can do to further illustrate our useEffect hook concept is to also bring in some state. Right now, this app is not maintaining any state. It's not storing any variables, any values really. We have this stuff in here. This auth value is being stored here, but it's only in the scope of this one little, this one body scope here. So, it gets there, it assigns to a value, outputs it to the console, and then it goes away. We can't use it again. So how do we get access to this auth value? Because in other words, this is actually not auth value. This is the JSON web token. That's a better name for this variable. It's our JSON Web Token. So we want to store that JSON Web Token on the front end. We want to keep it for a long time because that is super important to us. So one way to do it is to use another hook called useState. Okay, if I hit enter, it's going to also import useState up here from React. This is built into React now as of, like I said, React version 16 or something. So we can use state. And what useState allows us to do is to store state in the scope of our function here, our function app. So great, I want to store state. So how do we use this particular hook, this method, this function? Well, useState, you can pass in a default value. So the default value here for our JSON Web Token should be what? Well, for the JSON Web Token at the beginning, it's just going to be an empty string. We don't have one yet, so we can initialize it as an empty string. But we want to be able to store this value as something other than an empty string, right? We want to be able to, when we get access to the JWT here, we want to inject it back over here. Okay, how do you do that? Well, useState returns something. It returns an array, and at least I think it returns an array. Does it return an array? Hover over this. It returns blah blah blah. Does it tell us what it returns? Stateful value and a function to update it. So you can look at the reference here when I click on it. It returns, yeah, an array. So this is how you can use useState. So here, this is typically, if you have a background in Java, the world of Java, you are very familiar with getters and setters. Okay, that's essentially what this is. It's an array with a getter and a setter. So a getter function, so to speak, and a setter function. So for this, the get is just the name of the variable that I want to be using, which in this case is actually going to be JWT, the JSON Web Token. And then we need a setter method for setting the JWT itself, right? So instead of saying get JWT like this, like getter and setter, this can just be abbreviated to JWT because it's more convenient that way. It's a better experience when you don't say get. So there you go. We have two sort of, one method and one value that we can use to store and get access to our state. And our state in this case is JWT. So it starts as an empty value. And then down here, when we get it, instead of just saying JWT equals again, because now it's not going to work because we've declared a JWT variable name up here, what we can do is instead of assigning it here, we can access our setter method, set JWT, and pass in that value. Okay? So now we can set the value of JWT via the setter method, and now we'll have access to JWT globally. Okay? So now in hello world, we can say something like div JWT value is, and we can inject the actual JWT value, which is like this. I'm so used to Spring Expression Language. Cool? So now let's go back to our, where was it? Our app here. Oh, look at this. JWT value is, right? And if I refresh the page, you see there's a little delay, right? Refresh, empty, there. Refresh, empty, there. So it takes a moment to get access to that value. But that's okay. That's, that's just the name of the game. So briefly, the JWT value is blank. It's because that's how we initialized it up here in the useState. We initialized it as a blank value, right? Just, quote, quote. And then once it gets access to the variable from the server side and injects it, the UI refreshes itself, right? It reacts. That's the whole point. It reacts and repaints everything. It re-renders with that value. So there you go. Now we can, visually see when we do and do not have the, or rather when we do not and do have the JWT value itself. What you'll note is, let me put a log statement in here, log like this. We have the JWT. Okay, so you see, hello is rendering a bunch of times now, right? So let me do that again. Refresh. Hello, hello. So hello happens twice now because the UI has to re-render itself, repaint itself. right? And like I said, every time it re-renders and repaints, it goes and executes from top to bottom here before our return statement down here. Okay, so it's hitting that hello console log statement many times. Okay, so that's just a side effect of React. You have to realize that if you put any runnable code here, it's going to get executed every single time something changes on the front end. So that's just part of how React works. If you don't want that to happen that way, you would have to take hello out, or this console log out, and put it in over here, and then say run. And then if I refresh, you see hello only happens once now, because this block of code only happens once because our dependency list is set to be empty, which means only run this code once. Okay, now this changes if I inject a dependency of JWT. Okay, if I inject a dependency of JWT, we are now dependent on the value of the JWT variable, which, if all goes well, starts as an empty string, which means the state of the JWT variable is an empty string, which might kick this off because it's changed from maybe undefined to, an empty string. And then it's going to change again when we invoke the setter method. So I believe hello might print out twice. Don't quote me on it. My React is not expert level. So let me just see if hello gets printed out twice. So look at that. It got printed out more than twice. So we have the JWT. So hold on. Try it again. There. Twice. Yes. Good. That's what I expected. So it goes in here, it says hello, because JWT starts as empty, and then we get the JWT, and it fires again. So it fires again once we have this set JWT happens, the dependency changes, so it fires this again, and then refetches the JWT, right? Which is why you see we have the JWT and we have the JWT again. But what happened the second time is you might ask, well, why doesn't this just keep going in an infinite loop? It goes and gets a JWT, resets it to JWT, then it's, something has changed with JWT, therefore it runs the useEffect hook, gets a JWT, sets it in, the JWT's changed, blah, 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 blah. As you can see, that's not what happens here. That's not what happens because the second time around, so first it goes from empty to actually having a JWT. So it goes from empty here to we actually have the JWT. And that, or maybe it's undefined first. Maybe it's undefined. So it goes from undefined to empty, right? So really what we should do is instead of saying we have the JWT, and instead of saying console log hello, we should say JWT equals, and then actually let's use this notation. And then put JWT. So my guess is it's undefined, then it's empty string, and then it has a value is what I'm anticipating. Don't quote me. Obviously, I am mistaken. So it gets fetched twice. See, this doesn't make sense to me because it should be empty first. But that's the beauty of this. So we're seeing different behavior now, and it could be because of whatever I just changed. So I'm trying to do my best to explain the useEffect hook. Let me see what it's doing. JWT, hello, hello. So there is two invocations, but it changed the second time. So that throws my entire explanation out the window as to why it doesn't just keep changing and keep fetching, because it does change the second time, right? We have the JWT. Sorry, we need to change this to the backtick notation so that we can inject JWT in here. So, hello, look, we have the JWT empty, right? Okay, so it was the placement of my console log. So I have some vindication here. So the first time around, JWT is empty. It's an empty string. The second time around, we have a string. Okay, so let me inject here, JWT is, and you can see the weirdness of how the useEffect hook works. Let me clear, refresh. So JWT is blank. We have JWT blank. JWT is this value. And then we have the JWT. Okay, so that sort of adds up in my brain, right? We start with blank, and then it is blank. And then we fetch it here and set it. And it says, well, this is questionable, this one, because the set JWT returns a promise, I think. Doesn't it? Oh, it doesn't return anything. It's a void. This is an asynchronous function. So having the console log right below here does not guarantee that this is going to have a value, that we have a JWT. This part, yeah, is not guaranteed that it's going to actually show things appropriately, which is why we rely on dependencies to check the value of our variables. So this is a bit of a misnomer, trying to check it right afterwards. It's not always going to work, but this makes more sense to me. It starts out as empty, and it says it's empty, and then we go to set it. Oh, there we go. Yeah, we go to set it, and then it says we have the JWT, but look, it's blank. So there you go. That's my point. I apologize. I'm doing a terrible job here, but let me walk you through it. We start out as empty string. The useEffect hook kicks off because JWT has changed, right? Again, it's now has a value, so it kicks this off. The value is blank, which is why we see JWT is blank. And then it goes through here, it does the fetch and blah, blah, blah. And then it sets the JWT. So you would think that after we set the JWT, this next console log, because it's right below the set JWT, it's right on the next line, you would expect that it would say, we have the JWT and it would have a value. But that's not what we see. We see we have the JWT empty. So again, we just set it. So how come it's empty? Right? And that's because the set JWT is an asynchronous operation. It hasn't completed yet, and we have done a console log, so the value of JWT is still the original value. It has not been changed yet. So that's why we see that it's blank. But then, all of a sudden, JWT is, and then we have a value, and that is because the set JWT finally finished. It updated the value of JWT, and because it updated the value of JWT from an empty string to something different, it then fires off this useEffect again because it is looking at the value of JWT, listening for changes, and it's going to execute this hook, this function again when that value changed. So we changed from empty to something. So what happens when it changes from empty to something? It goes to console log and it says JWT is, which is what we see here. Okay, but then it's going to go to the fetch again and fetch a JWT again and set it, and then console log it. And then that's why we see this console log, we have the JWT because we just console logged it. But then here's the question. When we set it again, shouldn't it kick off this whole process again? Right? Because it changed, didn't it? No, it did not change. Although it probably reassigned a value to the JWT, it was the same string. So Java, our backend server, returns the same string again. Because that string is identical to the last one, it's actually, there's no change. So the only way that this would ever actually change is if you actually set a brand new value into it. Okay, so if you physically made a copy of that string and had a brand new object assigned into JWT, then it would kick off again. We'll see this quirk of the React useEffect hook dependency thing. We'll see this again in the future, but I just want you to know that there's a reason why it wasn't an infinite loop. Although it assigned a new value, that value was, for all intents and purposes, the same one as before. So there wasn't actually a change. In order to kick off a change, you need to replace it with a brand new object. Okay? So for example, if I had said set JWT and then said something like, I don't know, can you say new string and then headers like that? I forget if that's legit or not. If I do this, it might cause an infinite loop. Let me hit go. Yeah, see? Vindication. So this is an infinite loop, right? And you see the JWT changes every second that goes by because the JWT is based on time. So with every second that goes by, it's a different JSON web token. Anyway, so because I said new string, it is now a brand new object. Even though it's the same string, it's a brand new object. So just wanted to point that out. Now to stop this from happening, we can get rid of JWT as a dependency, resave, and then it only kicks it off once. See? It only kicks it off once. Now, it only kicked it off once, and although it looks like we don't have a JWT, I promise you we do have a JWT because it was set and it just didn't kick off the useEffect again. It only kicked it off once. And this console log only kicks off well, it only happens in here, right? So to see the value of JWT, we should have another useEffect hook. So the better way to do this is useEffect here, have another hook that has a function. And this dependency should be dependent on JWT. So you can use multiple useEffect hooks. Okay, and then here we can do a console log saying JWT. Okay. So let me remove this console log and let me grab this console log and move it down into here like this. Save. Boom. Now we see 2 iterations of JWT is, which makes sense. So just to show we have the value, it just looked like we didn't have it before, right? So anyway, this is the more appropriate way to do things. Let me get rid of this new string because that's just being redundant. We don't have to do that. This is, again, more or less the same code. As you can see, the JWT, the token itself does change, but that's because it's based on time, and we're refreshing and re-grabbing it every single time, okay? So that is a quick overview of the useEffect hook. Again, I apologize for the confusion of my explanation. Hopefully that final explanation was a much better one and you sort of understand how all the moving parts are working. You don't have to fully understand it. We're going to be covering this many more times. I'll be talking about this many more times because the useEffect hooks and the useState hooks are all critical to React and the way it works. You use it constantly. The only parting note I will give you guys here is that we're using state and we're storing it, but hey, it doesn't look like we're really storing it because it keeps changing, right? So I would expect that it should hold on to the token for longer than one refresh of the page. So although useState is great, it doesn't fully hold on to the state if you like refresh the page or something. So what solution do we have for that to make our lives a little bit easier so that we don't have to keep fetching this JSON web token every single time? So that's something we'll talk about in the next video. If you enjoyed this video, if you enjoyed watching me struggle, if you learned a little bit here, go ahead and give the video a like, and please do subscribe to the channel so you can get notification for the next video in this lesson. Next lesson in this series, so that you can get that notification and watch it as well. It would mean the world to me to get you as a subscriber. Thank you so much. Until next time, take care of yourself, happy learning, and bye for now.